North and South Korea are still at war. No peace treaty was ever signed, and the two share the world's most fortified border. But besides their animosity for each other, they also share a lot in common and sometimes agree on a few things. Here's a rundown of some of the instances where North and South Korea see eye to eye. Number 1. Anti-Japanese sentiment and nationalism. From 1910 to 1945, the entire Korean peninsula was annexed by the Japanese Empire. There were many atrocities committed during this time, most notably forced recruitment of Korean women to work as sex slaves or comfort women for the Japanese. Korean city names were replaced by Japanese ones, and some Korean monuments were even dismantled or replaced with Japanese buildings and structures. Today, both North and South Korea have worked to erase some of the effects. North Korea did it by basically closing its borders, while South Korea has rebuilt some of the structures taken apart by the Japanese during the occupation, as well as periodically protesting against the Japanese government. It is common to see this statue erected to remind people of the comfort women issue. One of these actually faces the Japanese embassy in Seoul. Number 2. Dokdo Dispute. Continuing on the theme of Japanese occupations, another point of contention is Dokdo, which the Japanese call Takashima. These islands are located in the Sea of Japan, or the East Sea, more on that in a minute, between the two countries. When Japan lost the Second World War, they signed a treaty to give up all their occupied islands. Dokdo was not on the list, but South Korea claims that it is a Korean island, citing historical records and the fact that it is closer to their island of Ulleungdo than Japan. Dokdo is currently occupied by a Korean police force and 2 residents, an act that Japan has claimed as illegal. While the dispute is between Japan and South Korea, North Korea actually supports South Korea in this issue, most likely due to the Koreans' feelings about Japan. Today, most maps in North and South Korea show Dokdo as being Korean territory. Number 3. East Sea Naming Dispute. When you ask people about the body of water between Korea and Japan, most people would say it's called the Sea of Japan. However, both North and South Korea insist on calling it the East Sea. The main argument is that it was called the East Sea well before it was called the Sea of Japan, and that the new name came after Japan started imposing its colonial rule. Currently, most countries call it some variation of the Sea of Japan, while others have included both names. Number 4. The Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. The most obvious thing North and South Korea have in common is sharing the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. In 1953, the Korean War's ceasefire treaty was signed, and the border between the two was drawn along what is now the DMZ. Within the DMZ is the Joint Security Area, or JSA. This is where the two sides come together and where many meetings and exchanges take place. Before the 1970s, this was a neutral place where North and South Korean soldiers can freely cross the line. But in 1978, an axe murder incident within the GSA put a stop to this, and each side has remained in their own territory ever since. Inside the GSA are these blue houses. They lie on the border itself, so half is in the north and half is in the south. Inside these houses, meetings take place along this table, so neither side has to cross the borderline. However, both countries offer supervised tours to the GSA, and during the tour, you are allowed to cross the border into the other country as long as you exit from the same side that you entered. Outside the houses, exchanges do take place and some do cross the border at the GSA. This one shows North Korean soldiers crossing over to examine and accept the remains of a fellow soldier who was swept into South Korean waters during a storm. This North Korean soldier accidentally ended up in South Korea and was returned home. These are relatively normal situations, unlike this one where a North Korean sympathizer went to North Korea without approval from South Korea and had to be returned to be arrested. It did not go well. Number 5. Kaesong Industrial Complex. In the early to late 2000s, if you're to go shopping for something in South Korea and it had a label saying Made in Korea, there is a possibility that it was actually made in North Korea. That's because in 2002, an agreement allowed South Korea to build factories in the North Korean border city of Kaesong, called the Kaesong Industrial Complex. South Korean companies could take advantage of cheap North Korean labor, while North Korea's government received much needed money in return. Over 100 South Korean companies sent around 800 South Koreans into North Korea to supervise over 53,000 North Korean factory workers. Despite escalating tensions, it continued to operate until 2013, when both countries started to threaten the viability of the complex to gain political leverage. As of this video's release date, it has been closed since 2016 in response to North Korea's weapons testing. Number 6. Dorison Station. Just down the road from the Kaesong Industrial Complex is a Dorison train station, which is the closest South Korean train station to North Korea. It was built to be a border crossing reconnecting the centuries-old train line that used to run the whole length of Korea. It was built to be a fully functioning station, and it even has a map of how it could connect to the Trans-Siberian Railway. However, it has remained mostly dormant and sits as a symbol, with customs and immigration checkpoints remaining largely vacant. It is a hope that in the event of reunification, the station can be immediately put into service, though that doesn't look likely anytime soon. Number 7. Choco Pie. One of the most smuggled items from South Korea into North Korea is Choco Pie, which are basically similar to wagon wheels treats made up of a marshmallow filling covered with chocolate. Choco Pies are manufactured in South Korea and became an instant hit when the Kaesong Industrial Complex was opened because South Korean workers took them across the border. Choco Pies have become so popular that it is common for them to sell for $10 each, which is about 10% of an average North Korean's monthly salary. Tourists to Kaesong have noticed that Choco Pie wrappers are one of the most common pieces of litter on the streets, and the North Korean government has even banned them specifically. In South Korea, activists use these large balloons to float bags of South Korean propaganda into North Korea. Among the items is usually a huge supply of Choco Pies. Number 8. Seoul as a capital. Both countries see Seoul as a capital of Korea, and why not? It was the capital during the Joseon dynasty and during the Japanese occupation. It is by far the economic and population center of Korea. Even the Korean royal palace is located there to this day. North Korea initially claimed Seoul as its capital, but because they didn't have control over it, they named Pyongyang as its temporary capital for a while. In recent years, South Korea has tried to move its capital further south by master planning and building an entire new city called Sejong, but that was met with strong opposition, since Seoul still feels like Korea's rightful capital city. Number 9. Poverty and dictatorships. Most people know that North Korea is currently an economic basket case with a dictator, while South Korea is one of the richest countries in the world and democratic. However, it wasn't the case until fairly recently. After the Korean War, both countries were more or less dictatorships. North Korea was under Kim Il-sung, while South Korea was under Syngman Rhee. They were both in economic ruin after the war and were so poor that they received humanitarian aid from Africa. For a while, North Korea's economy was actually doing better than South Korea's, but in the 1970s, South Korea had a leader, who also ruled like a dictator, named Park Chung-hee, who industrialized the country, leading to a huge economic boom called the Miracle on the Han River, named after the river in Seoul. It became one of the richest countries in the world almost overnight. South Korea became the world's only humanitarian aid recipient to become a humanitarian aid donor. However, the increase in wealth did not automatically lead to democracy. In the 1980s, various student uprisings led to a reform in government, which finally led to South Korea being the democracy that we know today. That means that South Korea's era of democracy is actually only about 30 years old. If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button below, and don't forget to subscribe for more nerd facts. To the right is a link to our Patreon, where you can help us make more videos just like these. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time for more nerd facts.